The Odyssey is an episode of Arrow that I definitely think deserves to be in the top 10, but the way our list kind of melded together, it didn't make the cut. This is, to me, the episode where Arrow melded itself into the show that it would become. A little bit of Deathstroke, a little bit of Oliver kicking ass, and a whole lot of pathos.
This one is one that I'm comfortable not being on the top 10 list, even though having talked to some people, I understand why it's on there for them, because this was one of the times where focusing on the flashback actually benefited the show and benefited the arc. As the seasons went on, the flashbacks had varying degrees of quality, and so spending that amount of time in the flashbacks would not have worked as well in later seasons.
I think it is a travesty that The Odyssey is only in honorable mentions. It was my number one choice when I compiled my personal list of Arrow episodes. I think The Odyssey is the episode where Arrow as a show really clicks in and it becomes what we think of it now, and it becomes the show that sustained 4 spin-offs, 6 if you count, 7 if you count the animated series.
I'm surprised Odyssey didn't make the top 10 because Moira shot her son. And I don't think Oliver expected to get shot. But it was great because it was the first time Felicity, after being introduced as helping out little things here and there, she had to learn the true identity of who he was in the weirdest way possible, with a dude in the green hood in your back seat like this is the urban legend movie. But it was great. And then to see him call Laurel, because it started showing he had plenty of chances throughout on the island, because we only knew him to be on the island, to go home, and he froze up.
This was also an episode that mostly took place on the island. It was almost all flashback, which is something that Arrow would do multiple times going forward, but this was the first time that we ever saw it.
This is where we get the truth of who Deathstroke is going to be and what his relationship with Oliver is going to be. And that is such a sustaining and integral part of what Arrow is that we got whole episodes with Oliver and Slade in the most recent season. All the bare bones that you need to make a great Arrow episode are here, and this is the point in the first season where everything after this is pretty much good.
To be honest with you, I'm a little disappointed that this didn't make it on the list, because this is one of my favorite season 1 episodes.
So since The Odyssey is apparently not in the top 10 episodes of Arrow, I'm going to be judging it very harshly going forward. I don't want to see no Oliver and Felicity living their best lives, you failed this omelet nonsense. I don't want to see no Damien Dark, so I'm coming harsh for these upcoming episodes.
I'm gonna be honest, I'm bummed that Suicide Squad didn't make it, because it is top 10 worthy. I'm gonna be honest, it is, because it was, I had just, this is when this show came out was when I started getting into comics, and that's when I figured out what the Suicide Squad was, and I was like, oh, that's such a cool idea for you make the villains be the good guys. And like, there's already a threat of like, oh no, the government's not being good guys too, because they put bombs in their head. And as soon as they announced that they were gonna do that episode, I'm like, how far are they gonna go? Because Arrow's pretty dark, but are they gonna actually go the whole way?
I think for me, Suicide Squad being honorable mention, it works because it's not in the top 10 episodes of Arrow. If you talk about Diggle's top 10 episodes, then yes, absolutely. The squad we got was very nice. Bronze Tiger, Michael Jai White, Deadshot, was a couple others, but it was the different Suicide Squad than what we thought we were gonna get. It was a good episode. It was a Diggle episode. It was not an Arrow episode, so I can see why it's not in the top 10.
Suicide Squad was actually on my top 10 list, thank you very much. This episode was so good, it helped them make a movie off of the concept of the Suicide Squad. Like, this kind of worked. Not only, you get the kind of a sense that it was like a backdoor pilot, like, hey, maybe we could make a show out of it. It was a testing ground to see audience response to the Suicide Squad as a group of characters, and clearly it was successful because not only did they do this episode, they had sequels to it in later seasons.
This episode of Arrow, I don't think even deserves to be talked about in the top 10. I don't even think it should be in the honorable mentions. I mean, yeah, I'll give it a plus because it's the first episode to have all Diggle flashbacks, and that's always a good thing. More Diggle, 2 thumbs up. But besides that, besides seeing the Suicide Squad, what is with it? Why do people like this episode?
The Suicide Squad is just a cool concept, so it makes an episode like this really cool. It's just a fun, kind of like a spy, clandestine narrative that the show doesn't normally get to play in.
Now, I love Diggle. Diggle is my favorite Arrow character. He's one of my favorite characters that was created for television and then transcended over to the comic books. And even though this is a Diggle-centric episode and we get a couple really interesting flashbacks, I still don't think that's enough to qualify this for the top 10, so I'm glad it didn't make the list.
Season 3 episode The Climb was on my top 10 list, should be on the top 10 list. It's one of the best episodes this show has ever done.
Again, I am surprised that The Climb made it into people's top 10 lists. I don't think a Ra's al Ghul episode deserves to be considered one of the better episodes of Arrow.
I'm not surprised this episode did, because to me, I'll be honest, I am surprised. Season 3 was the hardest season to watch. Because the whole angle with Ra's al Ghul, you were like, why does this need to happen? Again, I understand there are certain parts of the Green Arrow canon and story that mimic Batman. This was one that damn near mimicked it to the fullest.
I remember being super stunned by the way it ended, because going into it, I was like, I don't know how they're going to resolve this fight, because you can't have Ra's al Ghul lose because he's one of Batman's greatest enemies, so that doesn't really make sense, but you can't have Oliver lose because he's the lead character on the show.
I thought this was gonna be higher, because this is early on where we were still like, maybe Ra's al Ghul will be an interesting villain, and it kind of didn't pay off the way we wanted him to. But this was an amazing cliffhanger that kind of had like a little bit of like a hint of season 2's like the suspense, and you're like, okay, this is there's actually like stakes here. They wouldn't kill off their main hero halfway through, and since they brought up Ra's al Ghul, you're like, okay, so maybe we're gonna get a Lazarus Pit.
And even though knowing what I know from reading comics that Oliver's not dead, there was a whole back half of season 3, like they're not going to kill off their main guy, it was still a shocking direction to take it in, and it did the smart thing by playing with your expectations, by making it incredibly difficult to imagine how Oliver would come back from such a defeat, because not only does he get stabbed, but he gets kicked off of a mountain. And so even though intellectually you're like, well, he's got to come back, forcing you to a position where you're like, but how though, really makes it super engaging, and it's easily the best episode of season 3.
There were no stakes behind it, so I'm kind of glad it's not in the top 10. I'd have fought you if you'd put this in the top 10.
I think their version of Ra's is lacking. I think he's lacking in power. I think he's lacking in prowess. I think some of the stories around Oliver and Nyssa and Sarah are interesting, but you can't convince me that this version of Ra's al Ghul can take on Stephen Amell, especially when they're fighting bare-chested. No way.
The Climb is an episode that I'm glad it's in the honorable mentions. I am, because this episode is perfect for showing you what worked about season 3 and what really didn't work. A fight between Arrow and Ra's al Ghul? Great! A fight between these two shirtless men in a snowy mountain? Great! That cliffhanger? Ugh, really? The show's called Arrow, guys. We know it's coming back. You can't trick us. Why'd you try? Why?
But it did lead to us getting Brick for a couple episodes, and Vinnie Jones is amazing, so I'm not gonna feel bad about putting that on my top 10 list.
I like Checkmate as an episode a lot. I think it should probably be on the top 10, somewhere near the bottom of the list. I love the Adrian Chase reveal, and the fact that they managed to pull the wool over our eyes, I was impressed with.
I think the only reason why we're talking about the episode Checkmate in the honorable mentions right here is because I think it is only for the reveal that Adrian Chase is Prometheus. That's a great reveal. Because of the way they tricked his name with Vigilante, and we all knew what that character was called in the comic books, it's a great twist. But besides that twist, there's not much else in this episode, and I rightly think it doesn't deserve to be in the top 10.
I'm surprised that Checkmate is in honorable mentions. They started back with those hard cliffhangers, those episodes where the villain literally had the Green Arrow just by the strings, like, what can you do? Adrian's like, before you try to jump at me real quick, you reporter girl, I got her already. What you gonna do, make a scene in City Hall? And it was amazing. So for that not to make the top 10, it's kind of disappointing.
Checkmate wasn't on my list. I did enjoy this episode because it was an honest-to-God twist for me. Because they cast such a good actor for Adrian Chase, I was like, yes, I want to see. And clearly, like, Stephen Amell and Chase's actor, they got along really well, and they really bounced off each other well in scenes together when they were trying to save the city. I really miss Adrian Chase. I was glad he popped up in season 6.
We'd had Nyssa, and it kind of felt like Nyssa was our Talia, and we assumed Talia's off running around with Batman somewhere in this universe, and that's why we're never seeing her.
Not much more in this episode besides just Oliver and Adrian Chase just kind of growling at each other, and I think rightly so, does not deserve to be in the top 10.
I'm pretty excited to see what these top 10 episodes of Arrow are, especially because the Odyssey's not on the list.
The fact that we just went through those as honorable mention, it makes me way more excited because now I know what I picked for some of mine, and I know what I couldn't pick. And those 1 or 2 may have been an honorable mention. I won't say which 2, but the fact that we haven't gotten into them, I'm looking forward to this top 10.
This makes me think a lot of the top 10 are going to be episodes where Barry Allen shows up from The Flash, and that makes me a little bit less excited because even though that's a lot of fun, that's not necessarily the best Arrow episodes. We get it. Y'all love The Flash. Guess what? His own show's not that great.